Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm G, this time with a Warframe video. Now I did say that I'm going to make Steel Path videos and they are in the works, but before I get to Steel Path, I wanted to talk to you about a frame that I leveled up recently, so I only had recently some time with it, which was Grendel. And Grendel is, in my opinion, in opinion of other players, the worst Warframe in the game. I mean, I don't understand why they release it the way it is. I mean, it came with the Master, and the Master is kind of a cool weapon, you know, with the slam attacks, and the slams do a little bit of ragdoll, and it does do a pretty good damage just on its own. But Grendel itself, it's just like the clowning around. They decided to make a clown frame, and this was it. I mean, the only thing this Warframe has is that it eats enemies and spews them out. That's it. That was the first focus that they had. Oh man, just go make a frame that eats and spews them out, and that's it. Everything else that was done to him wasn't really well done, in my opinion. So let's look at his abilities and talk a little bit about it and see how it could be better if they were changed. Now his first ability is Feast. Feast spends 25 energy and it immediately gulps an enemy. Now while the enemy is inside you, you are dealing a little bit of damage to him, but you're also using up your energy. And Grendel doesn't have like a really big energy pool. I mean, sure, you can modify it, put a Hurricane React on it, but as it stands, I think it just, eats up too much energy for having an enemy inside you. Now, the enemy inside you does give you a little bit of an advantage, which is you get 50 armor for each enemy that you eat. And there's a cap at 40 enemies. Once you see 40 enemies, you have 2,000 armor, and that's it. That's the cap. You can't eat anymore. But really, how are you going to sustain 40 enemies with that health pool that you have? It's impossible. It's just not doable. It's not practical to use. Why? Well, because your other abilities, the second ability will also use energy. That ability is Nourish. It's actually a pretty good ability. You can cycle it for 3 variants. The first variant will give you more energy, which of course is cool and you need it to sustain the enemies. The second one is a damage buff, and the third is an armor buff. Now right here you have 2 things working against, or maybe in tandem. I don't know. There just seems to be one over the other, which is you're in enemies to get armor, but you also have Nourish to give you armor. You're in enemies and give you energy, but you also need nourishment to give you more energy. So you're creating the problem and offering itself the solution on the same Warframe, and this is just the second ability. I'm going to get the second ability. So yeah, I don't think this was really well done. I think this was thought through. Then you have his third ability that doesn't use any energy, it just uses the enemies inside you, which is Regurgitate. Now Regurgitate, it just basically spews the enemy, all the enemies that you have inside out, and they're covered in toxin, and they can hit things and do damage. And that's cool. I mean, that's fun. I can say that. The problem is, you can only use this if you have enemies inside you. I mean, it was a little bit like Nidus, which is first and second you get stacks, and then you use stacks on the other ones. The thing is, while you're using this third ability, you're still spending energy. You're still spending energy to have enemies inside you. If you're spending one by one and still aiming and doing that, you're still, it's still troublesome to use. His last ability, which is supposed to be this really massive, more fun of everything, is actually what I think the worst, which is Pulverize. In Pulverize, you turn yourself into a ball, and you can basically run against enemies, and also slam. Now, the slam and run again does impact damage, which is just a little bit of ragdoll, but is not as impactful as you might think. It's not like Rhino's dash or like Gauss. It doesn't really blow them away. You just roll around really slowly, and also your size is really small. I mean, you're just the size of a roller. I mean, you're a big guy. This Warframe Grendel is a big guy, but it's also this small roller that does a little bit of impact damage, and you can just slam around. But it's really complicated to control him. He's not fast or anything. So yeah, this ability, which is supposed to be like, oh, it's really fun to watch, it's not really practical to use. So this is what we end up with. A Warframe that cannot do abilities unless it collects enemies, and by collecting enemies is spending energy, and by doing his better abilities, which is the second, is also spending energy. So you're spending energy all on the same thing, and this shouldn't be done. They should really think about, should this Warframe spend energy or it should spend enemies? And it can't do both. It really shouldn't do both. So here is how I think I would rework the Warframe. First of all, by in enemies you get armor, but you should also get a buff in strength, in ability strength, especially for his second and his third abilities. Now it might be okay to use energy, but you also have the AUG for Gorman that uses your health, and your health pool is a lot bigger than your energy pool. Sure, you can modify both, but I think your health is better. But by using Gorman, you need to have some kind of cap for the life that you are using, because right now it goes up right to the end of your life. I mean, it stops at maybe when you have 2 of life, and it should really stop when you have like 100 or maybe 200 of life, because it finishes using it spews the enemies out, and then you get instantly one shot. And that shouldn't really happen. So yes, you can eat enemies. Maybe you'll still use a little bit of energy, but that energy needs to be dropped. I think right now it uses 1.5 energy per enemy that you have inside you, so it's really difficult to get that cap. So I would lower that cap to, instead of having to eat 40 enemies to get 2000 armor, you only eat 20. So you get 100 armor per enemy and not 50. I mean, I would double the amount of armor so you can get, you know, those enemies faster and give your armor that buff. But it will also give you like 5% more or 1% more strength. So you have 20 enemies inside, you have 20% more strength on your abilities. Now your second ability is really cool, as fine as it is. I would just make it usable without any enemy inside you. The thing would be, if you don't have any enemy inside you, your second, your third, and your fourth ability will always work. They will work less powerful, but they will still work. So then you would have to eat enemy, not have to eat enemy, but by eating enemies you would get more powerful as you use them. So in your second ability, that would happen. Without any enemies, you can still activate them. They will have a certain amount of strength. And yes, you can mod them to be stronger, but then by eating enemies, you could make them really, really strong and still be able to hold them. I would just add one thing. And now you have a energy multiplier, damage multiplier, armor multiplier, and I would add a health multiplier. The health multiplier would be really, really useful, especially in missions like rescue mission or defection, or even fighting Eidolons to keep the lures alive. I mean, it would just give energy not only to your teammates, but for NPCs also. And I think that's missing, especially because he has the Gormand AUG, and you cannot give yourself more life. You can only give yourself more energy. So this will actually work in tandem with that if people decided to use him with the Gormand, using up his health and not his energy. Now his third ability, Regurgitate, doesn't use any energy. I would keep it like that, except if you don't have anyone in, then you would use energy. You would lose like maybe 50 energy, and you would vomit. You would just vomit, you know, you just spew out toxic in front of you, and you'll cover the enemies in, you know, in the small area in front of you. Like, you know, the area that you use for feast, it will be the same area, but just vomit on them. If you have enemies inside you, you wouldn't use energy, but you would use the enemy inside you to activate it. These changes are necessary because imagine you're fighting a boss on your own. You cannot get enemies, you don't have aggro, so you need some way to build up your strength or to have a little bit use of your abilities without having enemies. While Natus can get stacks from even a single enemy, even if it's a boss, Grendel doesn't do that, so he needs a way to bypass that, so these changes are aimed to do just that. His fourth ability would be the one that I would change visually the most. I mean, for the more amount of enemies that you have inside you, the bigger you get. If you have no enemies, you activate it, you spend maybe 100 to 150 to activate it, and then it would eat up your energy, so you know you wouldn't be like in that form indefinitely. But the more enemies that you eat, not only does the enemy would be stronger, not by a lot, like I said, maybe 20%, maybe 40%, not something overboard like, you know, 100 or 200%, but something like that. And he would get bigger. He would get so big that it would be like the balls of rock that Atlas used. I mean, at least that big. Plus the area, I think it'll be really cool. I think it just, you know, it'll be fun to use in corridors, maybe in corpus corridors. I know the area gets a little bit bigger if you can modify for it, but I think it's not enough. So that will be how I would modify it. So that's it. That's how I think Grendel should work. Right now, he is the second least used. He's on top of Garuda, which I don't think it's fair because Garuda, you know, it can stand. I can do a survival mission with Garuda and sustain herself really well with minimum modifications. While Grendel, I use him as he is, and he is very complicated to use. He uses too much energy. Like I said, there's things that don't seem to work. They're working either two against each other or two of them are not working together. And I really don't think they did a good job in coming up with this Warframe, because the only thing that he has, like I said before, is just he eats enemies and spews them out. That's it. I hope he gets to review him and rework him as he gets to Prime. It won't be. I don't think it will be this year. Maybe next year. But yeah, he certainly deserves a lot of love. I hope you enjoyed the video. I love you guys. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe. And as always, have a great game, guys.